In 2009, the communities which make up Parkes Shire came together and developed a vision. It was a vision of progress, of transport hubs, vibrant communities, opportunity, learning and healthy lifestyles. So in May, we started by doing community consultation. We spoke to over 20 groups across the Shire, representing nearly 700 people. We developed a large list of projects which the community really wanted to see done over the term of the new council, some of which we could afford, some of which we were providers for, facilitators and advocates, and some which we couldn't afford. So then in September 2012, we did a survey. We looked at the things that were very important to the community, and on the list you'll see that local roads, water, food safety, public toilets, sewer are among the top 10 very important issues. We also looked at the things that we're very satisfied with. Libraries, festivals, parks, sewerage were amongst the top 10 of things that the community was very satisfied with. So over the survey period, we collected over 1,000 surveys, and what that showed was that most of the things that council does, the community really wanted us to do and to continue to do, if not do them more frequently and better. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity to put our resources in other areas. Roads and footpaths were by far the biggest area that needed work. So then in September we elected a new council, and now we're looking at putting together a 4-year delivery plan. The new council is now in place and operational. The 4-year delivery plan needs to reflect the community's views, but also to be fiscally responsible. So the current situation is somewhat unbalanced. You can see that we have an income of $24.9 million, of which $8 million is rates. We have an expenditure of $27.2 million, including $6.6 million of depreciation. Now, depreciation, as you may know, is the measurement of a deterioration of an asset. I think the electricity industry is an industry where we've seen where money wasn't put away for depreciation, and as a consequence, we've seen very large price hikes which we're trying to avoid. So if we're not funding depreciation, we end up with asset decline. So in the current situation, you can see that income is below expenditure, and into the future that means a gap, and our assets will continue to deteriorate. We have no new money for capital expenditure, and our operating deficit remains. If we look at that over the long term, going back to about 2001, you can see that the expenditure and our income start to diverge. There was also the global financial crisis intervened. In the general fund, Parkes Council lost in the order of $6 million in the general fund. Now, would that have prevented the need for us to do anything? It doesn't. If we're losing $2.2 million a year in terms of operational deficit, you'll see that $6 million really only delays the inevitable by a few years. We did, however, take it to the Federal Court of Australia and have won now on 2 occasions against one of the biggest banks in the world. So we are trying to recover some of that money, but certainly the court case vindicated our staff in terms of their investment decisions. Now, why is those lines diverging? You can see that rate pegging has been pegged at around 3% for 35 years now. We've had wages going at about 4%. We've had total emergency services going up around 8%, electricity 42%, manufacturing costs 7 to 8%, fuel, which affects our road building costs, 13%, steel 15%, telecommunications 8 to 10%. That's not considering now the flow on of the carbon tax or the effect of cost shifting from other levels of government onto our councils, which was measured back in 2008-09 as being in the order of $444 million across the state, equivalent to 5.7% increase. The other things that we're facing is an increase in expectations of the community. Footpaths, which were once narrow and meagre, are now need to be wider to accommodate the new types of mobility vehicles. Our road network was built for small trucks, now needs to accommodate larger trucks. We've got a network which doesn't accommodate high productivity vehicles, which we're trying to now address. And we've got a road network which is some 2,500 kilometres long, equivalent of driving from Parkes to Cairns. Playgrounds used to be simple, they're now complex, and it becomes very difficult to meet these expectations without a growth of income. New South Wales Treasury has also analysed our books. They've determined that 51.7% of our income is derived from our own sources, such as rates, whereas it should be more closer to 60%. However, because we're a sparse shire, that's not too serious. Our employee costs have been controlled to about 4.1%, reduced from the previous year, showing good cost controls. And our financial management has been strong in that we've had the appropriate debt to equity raising. However, we have got a $33 million backlog in assets and $475 million in total assets, and compared to benchmark ratios, we're underinvesting on those assets, a continuation of which is likely to increase the backlog. We have good reserves, however most of those are in water and sewer. We have $49 million in reserves, however only 5.4% of those are available to the general fund for unrestricted use. Our staffing levels have been kept relatively stable compared to other councils. Group 11 council average is 147 staff, we're 151, so we're not overly staffed. And each one of our staff are producing approximately $140,000 worth of service and infrastructure if you divide the total amount of expenditure by the total amount of staff. And that was in 2001. Now in 2011-12, that's around $230,000. So there's been genuine performance improvements. In terms of our rating situation, the component of the rates that we're talking about is the residential rate. Here you can see a property in Rose Street, Parkes, where the residential rate is around $662. So what's our average residential rate? Across Parkes in 2009-10, which is the last officially published figures, our average residential rate was $486, compared, for example, to Gabon, which was $510, Wellington, which is $554, Forbes, which is $760, Dubbo $850, and Orange over $1,000. So on average, our council has been 20% below the Group 11 council average for over 35 years. The 2009-10 farmland rate for Parkes was $1,542, compared with Forbes, Gabon and Lachlan, which were about $2,100, Dubbo at around $2,500, out to Narromine at $2,700. Similarly, the business rate in Parkes in 2009-10 was $1,823. Narromine, Wellington, Lachlan and Gabon were less. Forbes, Dubbo and Orange were more. So we've had 35 years of rate pegging with a residential rate 20% below the average and other costs skyrocketing, as well as expectations increasing. As a consequence, we really need to do something. So we're proposing another two options: the static delivery plan, which essentially stabilises the situation, and the progressive delivery plan. Firstly, the static plan. What we're proposing is that during the static plan, over the next 4 years, we would increase the residential rate by 10% a year for the 4 years. That's essentially 7% over the CPI, which we're suggesting will be around 3%. So what that does is brings income in line with expenditure over the term of this council. That then allows us to balance the operating deficit, allows us to bring depreciation back under control, and we can start to invest in our existing assets. And that's largely what we heard from the community when we were talking to them, that our current assets need to be addressed and brought up to a current standard. However, there's no money for new assets under this program. So the impact on our residential rate, just applying the CPI, which we've said assumed at 3%, the average residential rate in Parkes would rise to around $600. With the additional 7% on top of that, would rise to $770. So in the first year, that would be a rise of around about 69 cents a week, out to about $1.02 over the 4-year period, totalling in the last year to around $3.43 above CPI. That's less than a coffee a week. $44 a quarter, $179 a year, real increase. That's over and above CPI. So what have we done to reduce the impact on our pensioners? We're proposing that under this scenario, we would increase the pensioner rebate by $20 in the first year through to around $70 in the 4th year, which would reduce the impact on the minimum rate payer virtually completely, or the real impact on our average rate payer, so the impact above CPI, back from $3.45 a week to around $2.11 a week. In terms of the farmland rating, under CPI it would increase normally over the next 4 years to $18.91. That would go up to around $24.67, or roughly equivalent to a tyre and a quarter or a 2 tonne of APW1. That's $10.97 a week or $142 a quarter. The business rate under the normal CPI would increase to around $2,237. That would increase to, with the additional 7%, to around $2,900, or around about 3 cups of coffee a week. $12.98 a week or $168 a quarter. So what do we actually get if we do apply this increase? So $3.45 for the average residential property, then it generates a revenue according to that chart. So there's nearly $6.3 million over the 4 years, which would be directed to things like airport improvements. We intend to top up the town improvement votes to allow the communities to actually make some decisions for themselves around the infrastructure that they'd like to see improved. But it's really about footpaths, roads and drainage. We've also provided some money for weeds to improve the pools and for some sporting ground improvements. So the static delivery plan doesn't provide for any new assets. However, the progressive delivery plan does. It provides some opportunity for us to do some new things into the future over and above addressing this decline in our assets. So you can see by this graph that the income now rises above expenditure and a surplus is created. That then allows over the next 4 years for us to address things like depreciation of our assets, but also generate some new assets. Now to do that, it's the equivalent, we need to apply an increase of around 13% a year for the next 4 years. If CPI is 3%, then that's the equivalent of 10% real increase a year for the next 4 years. So what's that mean in terms of our average residential rate when that increase is applied? So with the normal 3% CPI, it would take it up to $600, as we mentioned before. If we then apply the additional or the real increase of 10% a year for the 4 years, that takes us up now to $865 for the average residential property. In the first year, that means it's around $1 a week, up to around $1.58 in the 4th year, or $5.12 overall. That's equivalent to a bit over 4 litres of milk, or just over 1 large cup of coffee, assuming a large cup of coffee doesn't increase over that period. $5.12 a week or $67 a quarter, $268 a year would be the real increase over and above CPI. To mitigate the impact on the pensioners, we've again proposed a $25 a year rebate in the first year, up to $105 in the 4th year, which would reduce the real $5.12 increase for the average residential property down to $3.13 for pensioners. If you're on the minimum rate, that would mean $2.19 would come back to around 90 cents a week. In terms of the farmland rating, under CPI we would go up to around $1,891, so that's the normal increase if you like. Apply the 10% then for the 4 years, it takes the average farmland rate up to $2,747. That's the equivalent of around 1.8 truck tyres or 3 tonne of APW. That would be around $212 a quarter or $850 a year. Similarly to business, under CPI would go up to around $2,200. $3,200 would be the real increase above CPI, meaning $250 a quarter or around $1,000 a year. So for the increase, what does actually the community get? For the $5.12 real increase for residential properties, and the other ones shown there, we get an increase of $9.3 million of assets which had to be distributed in accordance with the desires of the community. So around $345,000 is given back to the pensioners to reduce the impact on them. Airport improvements is important because we've got an aged lighting system along the runway which we don't want to fail and we need to replace that. We also see work to be done on the terminal building and the car park. The town improvement votes need to be topped up, which will allow the communities to actually make some decisions themselves about where they want to see their infrastructure upgraded. The footpaths get a major injection. We would see under the progressive program footpaths in the main streets of Tullamore, Trundle, Peak Hill and considerable work done in Parkes. We'd also start to address footpaths around some of the aged precincts and the schools. Streets and roads get a significant injection of funds. For example, an extra $800,000 would go into our reseal program, which would allow the reseal program to be reduced from currently around 30 years back to 15. So if we can reduce reseals of roads to around 15 years, then that stops the ingress of water and makes a significant difference to our road network. Gravel resheeting is increased and so is maintenance grading, all of which contribute significantly to our road network. And of course we will address as best we can on a rolling basis the improvements needed to allow B-double access right throughout the Shire. So what's the cost to move from the static delivery plan to the progressive delivery plan? We heard earlier that it's around $3.45 for the average residential property, around $5.12 under the progressive plan. So if we look at those sequentially, for the average residential property, it's around $1.67 a week to move, a real increase to move from the static to the progressive. It's around $5.40 for the average property and around $6.37 for a business. We took this information to the community along with some other information on roads and drainage and footpaths. And during a 2-hour presentation, the communities were able to see the situation in which council is situated. We talked about the current delivery plan. We talked about the static delivery plan, which balances income and expenditure, and then the progressive delivery plan, which actually seeks to provide some additional funds for some new assets. As a consequence of that, we then asked those community groups to vote. 6% thought the current situation was satisfactory. 16% elected for the static delivery plan and 78% for the progressive delivery plan. Thank you for watching the presentation. I hope it's been useful in explaining Council's situation and what we're proposing as delivery plans for the next 4 years of your newly elected Council.